What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable star meets television's most seasoned political journalist in what was supposed to be a routine morning show interview? The answer is television, gold that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Mark Wahlberg to completely lose it on live television. Trust me, this story has twists you won't see coming. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as producers scrambled to finalize last-minute details. Mark Wahlberg sat in the guest chair, adjusting his microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had done hundreds of interviews. Across from him, George Stephanopoulos shuffled through his notes, preparing for what his team had briefed as a straightforward promotional interview for Wahlberg's latest action film. The cameras rolled and Stephanopoulos opened with his trademark professional smile. "Good morning, Mark. Thanks for joining us today." "Good to be here," George Wahlberg replied, settling back in his chair with that characteristic Boston confidence. "So, let's talk about your new film, another action-packed thriller where you play the unlikely hero. Some critics are saying you're playing the same character over and over. How do you respond to that?" Wahlberg's expression shifted slightly, the easy smile tightening around the edges. "Well, George, I think those critics might want to actually watch the movies before they write their reviews. Each character I play brings something different to the table." Stephanopoulos leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to dig deeper. "But isn't there a pattern here? The working-class guy from Boston who saves the day through grit and determination. Some might say you're just playing variations of yourself." The studio audience remained silent, but backstage, producers began to take notice. This wasn't the light promotional banter they had planned. "You know what?" George Wahlberg's voice carried a new edge. "Maybe the problem isn't that I'm playing myself. Maybe the problem is that Hollywood doesn't know how to write authentic characters anymore. When you grow up where I grew up, when you've lived the life I've lived, authenticity matters." Stephanopoulos nodded, but his journalist instincts were now fully engaged. "Speaking of authenticity, let's talk about your past. You've been very open about your troubled youth, the legal issues, the time you served. Do you ever worry that these roles glorify violence in a way that might be irresponsible given your platform?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Wahlberg's jaw tightened visibly, and for a moment, the only sound in the studio was the quiet hum of the cameras. "That's an interesting way to put it, George," Wahlberg said, his voice deceptively calm. "Irresponsible. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for your life? Have you ever lived in a neighborhood where violence wasn't something you saw in movies, but something that determined whether you made it home safe?" Stephanopoulos maintained his composure, but there was a new tension in his posture. "Mark, I'm not questioning your personal experiences. I'm asking about the responsibility that comes with being a role model." "Role model?" Wahlberg laughed, but there was no humor in it. "George, I never asked to be anybody's role model. What I did ask for was a chance to tell stories that matter. Stories about real people facing real problems. But guys like you want to reduce everything to some political talking point. I don't think asking about social responsibility is reducing anything to politics." Stephanopoulos countered his own voice, gaining intensity. "You have millions of fans, many of them young people. Don't you think you owe them something?" Wahlberg leaned forward in his chair, closing the distance between them. "What I owe them is honesty. What I owe them is showing them that you can make mistakes. You can come from nothing and you can still build something meaningful. What I don't owe them is pretending to be perfect for the comfort of people who've never faced real adversity." The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. Stephanopoulos pressed on, his journalist training overriding any concern about the growing tension. "But Mark, don't you see the contradiction? You profit from portraying violence while simultaneously claiming to be a positive influence." That was the breaking point. Wahlberg stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "Profit? You want to talk about profit, George? Let's talk about how news networks profit from fear and division. Let's talk about how political commentators profit from keeping people angry and divided. At least when I make a movie, people know they're watching fiction." Stephanopoulos remained seated, but his voice rose to match Wahlberg's intensity. "That's not the same thing, and you know it. We're talking about your responsibility as an entertainer." "No, George, we're talking about your need to create controversy where none exists." Wahlberg shot back. "This was supposed to be about my movie, but you've turned it into some kind of political hit job." The host's professional demeanor began to crack. "Nobody's conducting a hit job. These are legitimate questions that any serious journalist would ask." "Serious journalist?" Wahlberg's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Now, is that what you call yourself? Because from where I'm standing, you look like another talking head trying to score points by tearing down someone who actually built something from nothing." Stephanopoulos stood up now, too, the pretense of a friendly interview completely abandoned. "I've been doing journalism since before you were making movies. Mark, I don't need lectures on integrity from someone whose idea of character development is learning new ways to throw punches on screen. The insult landed like a physical blow. Wahlberg's face flushed red, and for a moment, the former street fighter from Dorchester was visible beneath the Hollywood veneer. Is that what you really think? Wahlberg asked, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. That I'm just some muscle-bound idiot who got lucky. Stephanopoulos straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that betrayed his growing unease despite his attempt to maintain journalistic authority. Mark, I never said you were an idiot, but you can't deny that your career has been built on a very specific type of character. You're right, George, Wahlberg said, taking a step closer to the desk that separated them. My career has been built on playing characters that represent something real. Characters that show working people they matter, that their stories are worth telling. What's your career built on? Asking gotcha questions to people who actually create things. The studio crew exchanged nervous glances. This was spiraling far beyond anything they had prepared for. And the commercial break wasn't scheduled for another 8 minutes. My career is built on holding public figures accountable, Stephanopoulos replied, his voice steady, but his knuckles white as he gripped his index cards. When someone has the platform you have, they should expect scrutiny. Accountable for what? Exactly. Wahlberg's Boston accent was becoming more pronounced with each word. For entertaining people, for giving them stories that show them they can overcome their circumstances. Or, are you trying to hold me accountable for having the audacity to succeed despite coming from the streets? Stephanopoulos felt the interview slipping away from him, but his competitive instincts kicked in. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about the messages your films send, especially to young men who might see violence as a solution to their problems. Violence as a solution. Wahlberg laughed bitterly. George, have you actually watched any of my movies? Or did you just read the plot summaries your research team handed you? Because, if you had watched them, you'd know that in almost every single one, violence is shown as a last resort, something that damages the people who use it. But it's still glorified, isn't it? Stephanopoulos pressed. The hero always wins through force, through fighting. What kind of message does that send? Wahlberg shook his head in frustration. The message it sends is that sometimes good people have to stand up to bad people. That sometimes when the system fails, ordinary people have to find the courage to do what's right. But you wouldn't understand that, would you, George? Because you've spent your whole career safely behind a desk, asking questions, but never having to live with the consequences. The personal attack hit its mark. Stephanopoulos' professional composure cracked visibly. That's completely unfair, and you know it. Journalism is about asking difficult questions, not about living every experience personally. Is it though? Wahlberg challenged. Because it seems to me like journalism has become about creating narratives that fit whatever agenda sells the most. Advertising. You came into this interview with a story already written in your head, didn't you? I came into this interview prepared to ask legitimate questions about your work and its impact. Stephanopoulos shot back. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be doing publicity. The suggestion that he couldn't handle pressure was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Wahlberg's eyes flashed with genuine anger. Handle scrutiny. George, I've been scrutinized my entire life by cops, by judges, by critics, by people who think they know who I am because of where I came from. The difference between me and you is that when people scrutinize me, I don't hide behind some phony objectivity. I own my choices. And what about the choice to walk away from this interview? Stephanopoulos asked, his voice carrying a subtle challenge. Because that's what you're doing right now, isn't it? Running away when the questions get too tough. The accusation stopped Wahlberg cold. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, processing the implication that he was a coward. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. You think I'm running away? Stephanopoulos sensed he had regained some control. I think you're used to interviews where people lob you softball questions about your workout routine and your latest movie. I think when someone asks you to think critically about your work, you get defensive. Defensive? Wahlberg repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. George, you want to see defensive? Defensive is what you're doing right now. Hiding behind your journalist credentials to avoid admitting that you walked into this interview looking for a fight? I'm doing my job, Stephanopoulos insisted. Your job? Wahlberg's voice rose again. Your job is supposed to be informing people, not creating drama for ratings. But that's what this is really about, isn't it? You need something controversial to happen because your show is bleeding viewers to streaming services and social media. The accusation struck close to home, and Stephanopoulos' professional mask slipped completely. That's ridiculous. Good morning. America has been the top morning show for years. Has it though? Wahlberg pressed his advantage. Because from what I hear, you guys are struggling to stay relevant in a world where people can get their news from anywhere. So you invite me on hoping I'll say something stupid so you can have your viral moment. Nobody wanted you to say anything stupid, Mark. We wanted you to have an intelligent conversation about your work. Intelligent conversation, Wahlberg scoffed, This isn't intelligent, George. This is you trying to manufacture outrage because you think it'll get you trending on Twitter. Well, congratulations. You're probably going to get your wish. Stephanopoulos realized the interview had completely derailed, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. If this is what passes for discourse from Hollywood's leading men, then maybe the critics have a point about the state of entertainment. The condescending tone was the final straw. Wahlberg's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and everyone in the studio could see him fighting the impulse to do something that would end his career. You know what, George? You're right about one thing. This conversation is over. Wahlberg began to unhook his microphone, but Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. So that's it. When the conversation gets challenging, Mark Wahlberg just walks away. I guess that's the kind of hero your movies really celebrate. Someone who quits when things get difficult. The words stopped Wahlberg dead in his tracks. His hand froze on the microphone clip, and slowly, deliberately, he turned back to face the host. The look in his eyes made several crew members take an unconscious step backward. What did you just say? Wahlberg's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the silent studio like a threat. Stephanopoulos knew he had crossed a line, but his journalistic ego wouldn't let him retreat. I said, maybe this is who you really are. Someone who talks tough but runs when faced with real scrutiny. Real scrutiny. George, let's talk about real scrutiny. Let's talk about growing up with nothing, watching your friends die or disappear into the system. Let's talk about making mistakes so bad you think you'll never recover from them, but finding a way to build something meaningful anyway. Mark, please sit down, Stephanopoulos said, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. No, I don't think I will, Wahlberg replied. See, you called me a quitter, George, and that's something I can't let slide. Because if there's one thing I've never been in my entire life, it's a quitter. When I was 15 years old, getting arrested, I didn't quit. When I was trying to make it in music and everyone said I was a joke, I didn't quit. When I transitioned to acting and critics said I'd never be taken seriously, I didn't quit. The passion in his voice was magnetic. Even the hostile studio audience found themselves leaning forward, caught up in his words despite the uncomfortable tension. But here's what really gets me, Wahlberg continued, his voice gaining momentum. You sit behind that desk in your expensive suit with your Ivy League education and you judge me for the choices I've made. You question whether I'm a good role model, whether my work has value, whether I deserve the success I've earned. But what have you built, George? What have you created that didn't exist before you came along? Stephanopoulos tried to interrupt. Mark, I think you're misunderstanding the purpose of journalism. No, I understand perfectly. Wahlberg cut him off. The purpose of journalism used to be informing the public. Now it's about tearing people down for sport. It's about finding the worst possible interpretation of everything and running with it because conflict gets clicks. That's not what this is, Stephanopoulos protested. But his voice sounded weak, even to his own ears. Then what is it? Wahlberg demanded. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a hit job. You invited me here under false pretenses. Spent 15 minutes trying to make me look bad. And now you want to call me a quitter because I won't play along with your game. The studio director was frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the cameraman kept rolling. Sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented, Stephanopoulos made one last attempt to regain control. Mark, I think you're being overly sensitive about legitimate questions regarding your influence on popular culture. Overly sensitive. Wahlberg's laugh was harsh and bitter. George, let me tell you about sensitive. Sensitive is growing up poor and having people assume you're stupid because of your accent. Sensitive is working your ass off to become successful and having people attribute it to luck. Sensitive is trying to use your platform to tell meaningful stories and having some talking head reduce your entire career to guy who throws punches. I never said that, Stephanopoulos protested. You didn't have to say it directly, Wahlberg replied. It was in every question, every insinuation, every condescending comment about my background. You know what the real irony is, George? You accuse my movies of promoting violence, but you're the one who came in here looking for a fight. The truth of that statement hung in the air like an accusation. Even Stephanopoulos seemed to realize how far he had pushed things beyond a normal interview. Look, Mark, he said, trying to find some middle ground. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we start over and talk about your film? But Wahlberg wasn't having it. Start over. George, you don't get to spend 20 minutes trying to tear me down and then ask for a do-over, because you realized it's not playing well. This is who you are. This is what you do. You build your career on other people's discomfort. That's not fair, Stephanopoulos said. But even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Fair? Wahlberg shook his head in disbelief. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you get to sit there and judge my entire life's work based on some predetermined narrative? Is it fair that you get to question my character while hiding behind the pretense of objectivity? The host tried one more time to salvage the situation. Mark, I'm sorry if you felt attacked. That wasn't my intention. Your intention doesn't matter. George, what matters is what you did. And what you did was invite me here to promote my movie, and then spend the whole time trying to make me look like some kind of violent thug who doesn't deserve success. I never called you a thug, Stephanopoulos said weakly. You didn't have to, Wahlberg replied. It was in every loaded question, every skeptical look, every condescending tone. You know what's funny? You're worried about the messages my movies send. But what message are you sending right now? That if you come from the streets, if you make mistakes in your past, if you talk with a Boston accent, you don't deserve respect. The studio had gone completely silent. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Wahlberg looked directly into the main camera. You know what? I think people are smart enough to understand the difference between entertainment and reality. I think they're smart enough to appreciate stories about redemption, about second chances, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But apparently some people in the media think the audience is too stupid to make those distinctions. He turned back to Stephanopoulos, who looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the confrontation. So here's what's going to happen. George, I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to have your viral moment. People are going to watch this clip and argue about who was right and who was wrong. But at the end of the day, I'll still be making movies that matter to people, and you'll still be sitting behind this desk, looking for the next person to tear down. Wahlberg reached for his microphone again, but this time, Stephanopoulos didn't try to stop him. One more thing, Wahlberg said as he unclipped the device. Next time you want to have an honest conversation about my work, try actually watching. At first, you might learn something about the difference between glorifying violence and showing the real cost of the choices we make. With that, he dropped the microphone on Stephanopoulos' desk and walked toward the studio exit.